Hi there, Carrie Varela here. It's a joy to be joined today with Bronwen Logan and Michaela Daystar, and we are the Reiki Women Podcasts. We have a lot to talk about today, a lot to laugh about too today. And so our topic of discussion is are you a channel when you transmit Reiki to others? And we're going to talk a little bit about channeling in general, where it might have come from, how it's associated with Reiki, and whether or not we feel like it's in alignment with either our own personal practice or the Japanese origins of Reiki. So who would like to begin today talking about Reiki and channeling?
I'm happy
I
to
call it a Bronwen.
go. Okay. Okay. It's probably a little short what I have to say, but my thoughts on it, when I first thought about this, I actually did start laughing, because when I think about channeling, that word, and the system of Reiki, it reminds me of the different times that I've heard people say that they channel Mikao Usui. Okay. So, and they mean that they become Mikao Usui, and maybe they verbalize Mikao Usui, I'm assuming, or that he's in their head in some way, right? Which does make me laugh. I'm not a big proponent of that. I think we have our own wisdom, and that we don't need to actually take someone else's wisdom, or it just feels it's too subjective, and it feels a little bit like someone pretending to be someone for a marketing purpose, if I'm looking at it from a cynical perspective, possibly. But I said I'd be short. So that was the first thing I thought about when I thought of channeling. The second thing I thought about when I thought of channeling was that a lot of people talk about energy work, like putting their arms up and the energy is channeled through them. Okay. And I was thinking of these things as different things. But then I thought, actually, they're sort of the same thing in a weird way. So the way that I see them as being the same is, when we talk about channeling, we're talking about making something happen. And for me, the system of Reiki is not really about making something happen. So it seems to me that we have different tools to help us to it sounds a little cliche, but to be Reiki, yeah, rather than to do anything or to make something happen. So the tools are there to help us to let go, rather than to hold on to something and direct something. And, that really sits at my own personal philosophy behind how I practice, in that it's not about trying to make anything happen. And I actually had a dream last night, and I don't know if it had to do with this, but part of the dream was that I was in water, which I think is always symbolically emotions and things like that. Yep. So I was in water, and I'd sort of fallen into this water, and I was fearful, and I had stuff in my hands like this, and I was holding on to this stuff. And then someone I don't know, said to me, you can't exist in there if you're holding on to something in your hands. You have to let go. Yeah. And I thought, oh, that makes so much sense. And I let go, and then I was fine. And then I noticed everyone was standing around me in water, and I didn't have to be fearful at all. But I mean, you can't swim if you're holding, you can't find balance if you're holding on to things, right? You're going to drown. So you got to let go. And to me, directing energy, making things happen in the system of Reiki, yep, is more about like clutching onto things, rather than learning from tools to help us let go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and useful perspective to begin with. And I want to begin with what may be a little bit of a controversial statement, or at least one that sometimes when I share it in Reiki classes that I'm teaching, kind of raises some questions, which is that um, I can't actually say with any certainty at all, without any scientific certainty, um, that any one belief system regarding the system of Reiki or any other system is factually accurate. In other words, there are many different ways of believing and understanding what is happening with the phenomena that we are interacting with, that we're observing, that we're, putting our attention on, that we're bringing into our life in various ways. And there's numerous ways of understanding energy, understanding connection with other people or distance from other people, what's actually happening when we're doing Reiki or being Reiki. There are many ways to answer that question. And I can't tell you if the way that I believe, if what I believe is happening is factually accurate, 100% true in terms of what's happening with the phenomena in the world. What I can tell you is what feels true and what feels effective and aligned for me, which could be different and is different than what feels true and aligned and effective for others. And what I've experienced in spending a number of years, studying, practicing the system of Reiki from a Western perspective, and then shifting into coming into greater understanding, ultimately teaching from, as much as I can, the perspective of its origins, is that we're looking at two different, very different ways of understanding or believing what's actually happening when we're doing Reiki, right? And there are ways in which those two worldviews, if you will, are compatible, and there's ways in which they really aren't. They're really actually looking at the world in very different ways. And this question of channeling is one of those ways where we see very different perspectives on what's actually happening. And the idea that I, as a Reiki practitioner, having been attuned to Reiki, having learned some technique, become a channel for energy that is outside of myself and that comes through me, doesn't pick up my own personal energy, but moves through me and then into another person, that I then, when we're done with the session, step back from, cut that channel off, give back any energy that belongs to them and take back any energy that belongs to me, and cut off that channel to the universal energy. That's the way that I learned, like, what is actually happening. That's what's happening. Is actually a very distancing mindset. It's a worldview and a mindset that puts very clear, distinct boundaries around me, around you, around the universe, and names the energies of each of those things as separate energies, different from each other, distinct, and that need to be kept separate, that need to be kept distinct from each other. And that we need to take, precautions to give back what belongs to another person, take back what belongs to me, and be a clean and open channel for universal energy, which is different from what my energy and your energy. There's all these distinctions and differences and distances between all of those things. And what I've come to understand, at least my current understanding of the worldview, the spiritual perspective from the Japanese origins and the Buddhist origins, the Shinto origins of Reiki, is that it's really quite the opposite. That the system of Reiki is there to help us dissolve those boundaries and step into the plane of existence where those boundaries are not only unnecessary, but don't exist. It's okay to keep boundaries in our actual relative life, the way we're, talking with people. So I'm not talking about, we shouldn't have social boundaries with people. Like, those aren't the kind that I'm talking about. It's the idea that on the essential level of all life, we are all connected, that we are all one life, we're all one, interconnected pool of energy, if you will, and that the system of Reiki helps us to relax our gripping, as you just described in your dream, right? That holding on to some container that keeps us separate from each other, and that we're dissolving that and we're letting go of that, and we're relaxing into connection rather than bringing our attention to disconnection. And the idea of channeling really does open up in our mind a perception of difference, of differentiation, of disconnection from each other, and from life, from energy in general. And as I said in the beginning, I don't know which of those perspectives or if either of them are factually accurate. Right? Which one of them is true? I could not tell you. But I can tell you that when I shifted from the one into the other and began practicing with my mindset, what's happening in my imagination? What am I thinking is going on? Where am I resting my attention? When I started to rest my attention on softening those boundaries and on, connecting the energy that is in me with the energy that's in others and really seeing that all as one pool of life, my life got easier and better. I feel more grounded. I feel more spacious. I feel more connected. I feel more resilient and resourced in my own life. And I feel more effective in my Reiki sessions with other people. And I have people reporting back, more levels of effectiveness. And so, yeah, that's just kind of the reflections that this question of what about channeling took me down, and really, just a real curiosity about what changes for us when we change our mindset on things, right? Because in the Reiki session itself, you could watch me do a Reiki session now versus 6 years ago, and it might look more or less the same. What's different is what's happening in my mind. Like, where am I resting my attention? What am I visualizing? What am I believing is happening? What am I, where am I focusing? And that's really interesting to me. What are we paying attention to when we're in our practice, and what does that change about our experience and the experience of others when we make that kind of a shift? That's what I've got.
I think these are all really fascinating points of conversation, and it's always interesting to me. We can take one question and there's a lot of nuances, a lot of different ways of thinking about it. But I think it's always really important to, add that critical awareness piece, that critical reflection to things that within the world of Reiki are kind of well understood or commonly discussed as, and really decide for ourselves, like, where we stand with it. And there's a lot of things I want to say about channeling, but I think the first thing that I would want to say is that my litmus test in anything is, does this help me live a more balanced and centered life? Does it help me be in my body better? How well does it help me stay focused and grounded and present to my kids, which is something that I struggle doing because they're young kids and they're really hard to stay focused and grounded and centered with. And so I personally find that, a little bit of channeling, it's okay. Like a little bit of like feeling energy flowing through me, moving through me. That's lovely. But it can be a place of imbalance as well. So too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And I think that that's definitely where my point of view lies with channeling. And then there's some concepts around channeling that are interesting to me. So from my background in yoga, I think about yogis who live this aesthetic paths, and probably many monks and aesthetics in Japan also live this path of disconnecting from an external world, spending most of their time in silence and meditation in monasteries or caves. And from my understanding, one of the things that they were doing there is trying to tap into divine wisdom, to universal wisdom. And then with that process of tapping into that wisdom, going and serving their community, whether they're giving lectures, talks, or interestingly, from the tantric worldview, is that these sages were also writing texts. And so they were writing what they were discovering, what they were tapping into, what the wisdom that was kind of guiding their lives and guiding ultimately the pen that they would write tantric texts. And so the Indians, they have on the subcontinent of India, they wrote more texts. There's the second most written civilization in the world, only next to the Chinese, who wrote a lot due to like record keeping. So that whole process of, in that sense, channeling divine wisdom, writing out this divine wisdom for future generations, for their communities, that was what they were seeking. And so I think to some extent, that's still what we're seeking in modern day terms within Reiki. Is we're seeking wisdom, we're seeking insight from a higher mind, a higher perspective that we can't necessarily access in our day-to-day consciousness, because it's full of to-do lists and, caring for people and feeding people. And so that, that task of really tapping into that insight, that wisdom, was reserved for somebody who's removed from society, or removed themselves from society. And I think some of the work of modern spirituality is about bringing that idea of connecting to divine wisdom into our daily life. And so making the distinction for ourselves, it might be useful to think of it as maybe not so much something external to me, but rather inside me, this divine wisdom that's coming through me. And maybe we even think of it as, a deity or God itself, the universe itself speaking through us. And to be completely humble, I can't say that in my day-to-day life I'm in touch with all that is, or if it's even my business to be in touch with everything. And when when I think of like Reiki in the workplace, just flow with me for this. It's like, imagine you're all working in a workplace. It's 50 people coming in to this one space. You're all working in cubicles, and we're all like living our own little worlds, right? And we're all like in our own little universes, and there's maybe personality conflicts, there's tasks that we have to do to come together. And I think of Reiki as this kind of like overarching consciousness that all of us share. And there's times where that can be in harmony with one another, sometimes where it can be in disharmony. And so a place of imbalance sometimes can be when we're trying to use our psychic energy, our intuitive energy, to figure out what people are thinking about us. Is one thing that I've really noticed for myself, that I can fall into that. And yet at the same time, I'm learning how not healthy that is for me. And so taking a step back from trying to be in, anybody's energy but my own, but really holding my own energy powerfully and well. And I've also studied Jikiden Reiki, which I think is really interesting. And although a lot of the things in Jikiden Reiki are pretty close to those who haven't done a course, one thing I would say, and I think it's in the book about Jikiden Reiki, so I think I'm safe to say it, but there's this kind of cosmology worldview of that we all have a pipe, a pipe that connects us to the universe. And in our day-to-day living, that pipe can get clogged up with traumas or worries or fears or angers, etc. And so the work of Reiki is clearing that pipe every day. And I tend to like that way of thinking a little bit more, because it gives me the sense that like I could do that work and then there's some equilibrium, there's some balance. And I know that for the many years that I did conceptualize Reiki as this external energy that I'm channeling through, it was hard for me to find the ground. Like I felt like I was kind of in that river all the time that Bronwen had that dream about, And it's interesting when we're in the river, because we can realize very quickly, oh, what am I holding on to? Like I'm holding on to this and I'm holding on to that. And those are the things that I need to let go of. So it's helpful to get in that class 5 rapid, every once in a while, like swim in it and see what's there, and allow yourself to be in this like bigger wave, this bigger flow. But if I'm there all the time, I can't, it's exhausting. It's tiring. I don't feel presence. And again, that circles me back to my litmus test. It's like, how does this help me live a better life? And so when I think about these sages who spent their whole life in a cave, I think one of their gifts that they were trying to give humanity was how to live a more divinely inspired life, and how to use the gems of whatever they realized, and to bring it to the world. And that was their offering. And I think we can have more of that in our day-to-day life. We don't have to be aesthetics nowadays, that we can find this in our day-to-day living.
Yeah, I do think that the system of Reiki is, I think that's what, what sets it apart from a lot of other practices, is that it is more about day-to-day living than about sitting in a cave. I do think that, I don't believe that we're meant to go and sit in a cave. I think the practices, they're just, like I said before, just tools to help us, ritual to help us, structure to help us. But yes, you're right, the fundamental idea of what they're trying to help us do is different, and you've both sort of spoken to that. So what people are wanting out of their practice, and we'll all want probably something different anyway. I mean, I can't say what someone should want in their life. That's up to them to find their own needs and wants and desires. And yeah, I mean, there was so much in all of that. I wrote a few notes. I was just like, oh my goodness, there's so much to talk about in all of this. I didn't have an idea that it would be such a big conversation. Yeah, I mean, going back to the mind, Michaela, you were talking about the mind, and I do think that, the stuff that you were talking about, Michaela, in the more Western styles, where we're making a lot of distinctions, and like where you might need 100 different symbols, and whatever it is very mind orientated, and that, I think, is an issue, because it is an imbalance, and it's something that humans can get very carried away with the mind, and the mind is such a powerful thing. But the mind is actually, I think we're distracting the mind from what it's meant to do. And it, first and foremost, it's meant to be looking after us. That's the way I see it, that the mind is making all of these things work. And that's what makes a healthy body. Yeah. And if it's distracted with all the other stuff that we are constantly doing in our heads, then I think we're taking the energy, if you like, away from this natural process of keeping ourselves healthy and allowing our mind to do what it needs to do. So finding that balance is really important. And I think that the system of Reiki, does speak to that with the practices that we have. They're very, well, at least in the practices that I practice. And, it's very much about getting the head, all that distraction and that out, by bringing it down into the hara, down into that grounded sense. And I find that really beneficial and helpful. When you were talking about treatments, I think that was Carrie. Was it Carrie who was talking about treatments?
Michaela, I think.
Actually. Oh, it was Michaela, right? Yeah, actually, you said it makes it easier now, in going from these different sort of perspectives. For me, it makes it much more difficult, actually, working from this perspective of getting out of the way and letting go, because it's incredibly hard. And it's much easier to go, oh, I'm going to do a bit of this and I'm going to do a bit of that, because we're distracting ourselves with doing. Yeah. And it's the mind. So I'm like, oh, wow, that's easy. I can just let go into that. And, oh, yeah, I could do this. And then I could do a bit of that. And, it's fun. And, but if we were to say to let go of all of that, and to be totally in this lovely natural flow of everything, then that's incredibly difficult to do, because the mind keeps wanting to jump back up and go, hey, hey, hey. And it's like, hey, just come back down, and really let go into that, and allow what Carrie was talking about, that inner wisdom, or for me, for that person, their inner wisdom to have space and to do what it needs to do, rather than us telling it and making things happen all the time. I've been doing a a 14-week class with Robert Peng. Do you know Robert Peng? He does Qigong stuff and Qigong, and he always has this little thing that he says, and it's amazing how all these practices all come around to a similar thing. But he says, when you're just sitting there at the end of a practice, he says, the chi, oh, I did write it down so I would remember. I'm in chi and the chi is in me. Yeah. And he says that every time. So I am in chi and the chi is in me. So he's just saying, and it's how I see the system of Reiki, that, you know, I am Reiki and I'm in Reiki. And I often see that as this sort of like parallel world of, or mirroring world of, you know, the big universe and the little universe, me being the little universe, if you like, in the big universe. And, you know, the big universe is actually a very good teacher, because it is doing its thing. And I'm the one who is doing all the distracting stuff. But if I can let go of that, then I can truly mirror that. And then we flow together. And I do think, Carrie, feeling energy is not channeling in my head, right? So feeling energy for me is feeling energy, but and that's okay, because the chi is in me as well as, yeah. So feeling that energy is not something that is necessarily that I make happen or whatever. But I mean, yes, it can be a result of doing practices and things like that. I was thinking of Hatsureiho, of the practices that we do. So Hatsureiho means to generate greater amounts of energy. So it's a ritual, a practice, a tool. We use these things to help us to be energy, to feel that energy, to yes, a side effect of that is that we feel that energy. But it's very much about us being a part of this everything. And if I felt that I had to connect to everything, then that would mean that I was initially disconnected. And I guess that's my fundamental feeling about this, is that I'm not disconnected. Yeah. So when we talk about having to connect, there is a sense in our mind that we are not a part of this world, that we are a separate being, energetic being, and different energies. And I guess I don't see myself in that way. Oh my goodness, I can't think of all the things, but that was just some of what I was thinking about. And, you know, there is so much in it, really, isn't there? It's fascinating.
It really is. And yeah, you're right. This simple question of, you know, are we channeling energy when we're doing Reiki, like really opens up quite a bit. And I think if I said easy before, I don't remember how I phrased it, but what I probably meant was simple, right? Because I completely agree with you that like it was very if not easy, familiar in my previous way of doing Reiki to busy myself with all of the things, right? That, as you described, like a little bit of this and this, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do this and this and this. There's a lot of busyness to the way that I used to practice, and that's very familiar to how we just kind of operate in society. And so there's an ease to that. You know, to your point, the simplicity of the practice that I'm in now is refreshing, and it has increased effectiveness for me. But I completely agree with you that the easiness of just doing things the way I normally do things is, you know, was not there. So it was definitely an adjustment to work in this much more simple way that was definitely not easy at first. And this, you know, a couple of things that came up from listening to both of you, you know, firstly, Carrie, yeah, when you were talking about, well, I do a little bit of channeling because I like to feel that energy moving through. I was like, do I not feel energy moving through now that I don't think of myself as channeling? And the answer was no. I do still feel quite a bit of movement of energy, and it's not one directional, right? It's not like coming in the crown and moving, to my hands. I can direct it to a certain extent with where I'm paying attention. So when I'm doing Tanahira and, using touch with a person, I'm concentrating some of my attention on, going to the hara and then going to the hands. And so there's a certain direction that can result from that. But it's really more of a kind of a radiating from the center outward. So I think the concept of it shifted, but the sensation of energy moving in the body didn't go away when I shifted my mindset from the one to the other. So that was an interesting question to ponder. And then the other piece related, Bronwen, to what you were sharing is that, what I've experienced for myself, and particularly when working with my students, is that the structure, the mindset, the worldview of Western Reiki and all of the differentiation and the differences and distancing that we've referenced, that's there. A lot of that feels, I'm not going to say this is true 100% for everybody or even in general, but it feels to me that it's rooted in a lot of fear, that it's rooted in a desire to, a fear of losing ourselves to the collective, a fear of commingling with somebody's energy that's bad for us, a fear of losing our own energy to another person, a fear of what would happen if we truly were all connected. I had a student tell me once, quite honestly, quite frankly, I'm afraid of the idea of interconnection. I don't really want to lean into that, right? She was going through a really, really challenging time with another person in her life. And I knew that she didn't want to feel that connection with that person. She's trying to disconnect from that person. And so we had a really great conversation about the difference between relative reality, our day to day, how we make choices in our relationships and moving through our life. That does, in fact, require boundaries and distance. Some people are not good for us to be in physical proximity with in our daily life. 100%. The difference between that and the ultimate reality, which is where Reiki lies, which is interconnection, that we are all connected, and that when we're focusing our attention on our connection, that's where we're operating, and that both of those things can be in operation at the same time. I can make choices about who I spend time with and who I'm in physical proximity to, and close that opportunity to certain people, because in relative reality, that's what's best for me. And at the same time, in my meditation, when I'm focusing on my true self and my ultimate reality, I can know that I am in fact connected with that person, that it's a hara to hara connection. It's a source connection. It's not a connection in the day-to-day choices that we're making. And that distinction really, for me, began to dissolve that fear of connection. And it became a framework that I could communicate with others and with my students that, for the most part, is really supportive and really helpful in kind of holding what seems to be conflicting truths. That we can have boundaries in our day-to-day life and distance, and hold interconnection as kind of the bigger truth of things. So yeah, those are some of the things that came up listening to you.
Yeah, I think coming back to this whole idea of maybe channeling an entity or channeling energy that isn't yours. I do see that a fair amount within Reiki circles and just energy healing circles as well. And I have a friend actually who channels this particular entity, and I see her as a very profound healer and somebody who has done the work, is tapping into this inner knowing and living her life authentically based off of how she sees the world, and something that feels very real and profound moving through her. Yet, however, I've also seen that happen to people, and I can see it being mentally destabilizing, and challenging for somebody. And like the example I was using with Reiki in the workplace, it's like Reiki's this overarching like consciousness with everyone. There's a sense that we want to be in that space a lot or as much as we can, but it can be very distracting, distracting from living our day-to-day life. It can be distracting from our own inner wisdom. And so the tendency there is sometimes to disconnect from our own truths, our own wisdom, and place it into something that's otherworldly or outside of ourselves. And there was a time in Reiki where I was kind of exploring that too. And I could say that it didn't feel good. And I kind of felt like I wasn't living my life with my own self at the reins, like there was something else, like it was a little chaotic. And while, anybody can choose to live their life and think about and view the world as wherever they want, however they want to view it. Again, it comes back to, does that help us live our life better? I think of like Abraham Hicks, who, had this, whole worldview that she was channeling this team of guides, team of angels. And I see a lot of truth in a lot of her writings. And so I have this sense that there was this love or this transmission that was wanting to come through her. But I think it makes it really hard to explain to muggles what we do. To borrow a term. And if you don't know what that term muggle is,
The muggles. The muggles.
your head is
So
under a rock. But okay, so there's this magical element too, right? And I think that is what's happening in a Reiki session. It's not only just me and my perspective and my worldview and the things that I've navigated through in my own life that I like live that in order to share it with my students and share it with others, because I've worked through so many things, and I know that there's some benefit to sharing that. But and then there's the student and their experience with the client and their experience of having an issue that's beyond them, that they're seeking help for. So they're coming to the table seeking healing or seeking that perspective from a higher consciousness, perhaps. And so the magical element, the little sprinkle of magic in the room, is Reiki, and it's Reiki that's really aware and guiding the healing. And so yeah, like I said, I think that there's a desire to be in that magical place. And I don't know, Bronwen, you had a post recently. It's like something about letting the magic that exists all around us to be more visible. So like have that more in our day-to-day life. And that's what I think helps us, and that's the way I think channeling helps us too. So if we do feel really alone, the feeling of being connected to a spiritual guide, it can give us the sense that we aren't alone in our life and we are connected, and that there is this kind of benevolence of our spiritual insight from a different realm that's helping us live a better life. And so I think there's some value in that. But then when it gets out of balance is often in our egos. And when our ego attaches saying, I channel this guide and this angel, and that must make me important or better than who I am, or give me this illusion of power when I'm really powerless in my life. There's a lot there that I think is healthy to explore, and one should explore if that's the route that you're going and that's what you see. And so, when I see it happen in Reiki circles, I'm always just a little hesitant about it, because I have seen people that I love dearly within the world of spiritual healing who are kind of lost in their own spiritual fantasy of something that's happening, or this, this is going on, and I'm like part of this angelic team. And it's kind of hard for me to see that, because it feels like to me that there's a wounded ego there, and that person is having a hard time feeling a sense of self-worth in what they do in their day-to-day and in their life, and in whatever their offering is to the world. So I always want to acknowledge that is potentially happening for somebody. I believe that there is benefit in both ways of thinking, but it is about this kind of our own personal approach and evaluation of how we want to see the world, and is that healthy to us? Does that support us living a better life?
Did you ever read Conversations with God? Neil Donald Walsh. Yeah. So he, got up in the middle of the night and started writing or asking questions because he was at a low point, and he started writing the answers to his questions. And he's written a number of books, and he called them Conversations with God. And it might sound egotistical to say that he's having a conversation with God in a sense, yeah, sort of like what you were saying, Carrie, but also on the other side of it, if you read it, everything that he says has this sort of ring of truth to it. It's really, really beautiful, right? And for me, and I think probably for him, it didn't have to be God, but it felt like that God thing, that it was a lot deeper. It was what Michaela was talking about that ultimate truth, like it was really like getting beyond the mundanities of everyday life, and it just got to the core of things. And it was I found it very touching and very meaningful, really beautiful stuff. And somehow he just really tapped into that, and I don't know if he actually, yes, the book was called Conversations with God. I don't know if he actually thought that he was channeling God. I who knows, but it's such beautiful stuff. And I do think that we have that. And my concern, I guess, is when, sort of like what you're saying as well, Carrie, I've been in places with people who've done channeling and things like that. I think that it can be unempowering rather than empowering. And that's the issue there, right? And it has everything to do with what you were saying, Michaela, which is it's all to do with the mind and how we see these things, what light we put ourselves in this world. And I do think that life is magical.
Absolutely. Well, and when we think about it, like if we put channeling and interconnection as two worldviews, ways of understanding what's going on that are not in conflict with each other necessarily, but that are, again, just different ways of perceiving what's happening. And then if we look at something like Conversations with God, and we say, is this person channeling answers from some other entity completely outside of themselves that they're bringing in and transmitting? Or are they leaning into their connection with all of life? And inside of that connection are the answers, right? Are the pieces of wisdom, the experiences, the perspectives, the insights, the intuitions that have come through the human experience over time, and is therefore available to us in a certain form, when we rest our attention on that point of connection. It's just two different ways of thinking about what's happening. And for me, that idea that, like, I'm going to step out of the way, to your point about kind of disempowering, it feels that way to me, to think about kind of my being stepping out of the way and allowing the vessel of my body and my voice and my ability to write down messages or communicate them verbally, turning that over to something separate and distinct and different from myself. Again, it's this distancing. It's this, we're completely different entities, and I'm going to give over my power to this other entity to communicate, versus we're connected, and therefore wisdom that has come through other people is in some way available to me, and I don't have to step out of the way in order for that to be true. I can step into something bigger than myself, and retain my sovereignty, and at the same time open myself to what is available in this just vast pool of humanity that we exist inside of. And again, just different ways of thinking about what's happening, none of which can be proven to be accurate, scientifically, accurate phenomenon happening in the world. It's just, what are we experiencing, and how do we interpret it? How do we explain it? And my explanation works very well for me. It might not work well for other people, right? And if somebody listening is like, no, I'm absolutely certain that what's happening is that this other energy or this other entity is coming through me, and I'm happy to do that. I am honored to step away, to step aside, and allow my resources of my body and my voice to be given over to this communication. And that feels empowering and beautiful to you. Awesome, right? Lean into that, right? And perhaps, consider what your perspective and your experiences are regarding some of the things that we've brought up. What Carrie was saying about ego, and about how we can get attached to that identity as somebody who, has ownership over this channeling, has ownership over this message that comes through. It's mine, and it makes me special, as opposed to, we all have the capacity to be connected and therefore tapped into a wider pool of knowledge, right? Like, what's our relationship to what's happening? And does that serve life? Does it serve, growth and connection? Or does it divide us? Does it, differentiate us? Those are some of the things that come up when I think about it. And, it's really, it's a really nuanced question, really, when it comes down to it, that can be answered in so many different ways.
Yes. So friends, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think about channeling? What's your thoughts? Have you experienced something where you're channeling some entity other than yourself? What's your experience as you provide Reiki to your clients? What's your worldview in relationship to you, the universe, and how you share the gift of Reiki to your community, your clients, your students? So we'd love to have a continued conversation about all of this. You might also be in the know about our new Facebook group that we're starting. And there's a link right on our Facebook page to join our group. We'll be having more discussions about these episodes. So please join our group, and we can leave a little note or a little link to it in our show notes. Thanks so much for listening to this conversation, thinking about it, pondering it, see which side of the dividing line you lie on, and know that no matter where you are, you're welcome here to listen to these conversations. You're welcome in the Reiki Women podcast community. And if you have somebody you know that might benefit from this conversation, please feel free to share that with them, or like or comment on our episodes so that more people can get this medicine into their lives. We appreciate you so very much, and wishing you a blissful day. Bye-bye. Next time. See you next time.
Goodbye, friends.